Okay. All right. So this is going to be the official Ableton basics, setting up your preferences. Just a quick run through. You first buy Ableton. Um, your preference panel is live preferences. You know the quick key. There's other ways. First thing you're going to want to do is go in here if you have an audio interface. I have some alternate routings going on for the mic and streaming, but you're going to set up your input and your output to your audio box or whatever interface you're using. And if you have a mic, especially set up both of them. If you're just using your monitors or some type of output, you don't need to set up the input. Next is going to be your in and out sample rate. This has to do with where the quality that Ableton is actually sampling the sound at, and 48,000 is the highest there is. So you generally just kind of want to stick with the highest quality that your computer can handle anyway. 48,000 is not extreme or anything. Okay, buffer size. That has to do with how the audio is being read back to you as you're actually creating or listening to it. So, in other words, as you're watching the beat go across the screen, what you're hearing and what you're seeing are going to be exactly the same. The closer your buffer size is to, or the smaller your buffer size is, closer it is to zero. And the larger your buffer size is, the further away in milliseconds, and it'll actually say down below, you can see there 2.94 milliseconds, and the overall latency 5.77 milliseconds. Basically, the way that works is that when you start to actually get all your sound designing and actual mixing and production, you'll want to raise your buffer size because you'll find that it's really intensive on your CPU usage to have a low buffer rate and have all these devices. However, whenever you get ready to record your vocals or you need to record an instrument or something live, that's when you're going to lower your buffer rate as low as you possibly can. And since you might already have devices, it might be a song you're working on, you're going to need to either freeze, flatten, or do whatever you got to render down all those devices to where you just have audio so you can get the sample rate to be as low as you need it to be, which you may not have to, but you've got crazy songs, you know how it is. Okay. So that's the biggest importance here. We go into our look and feel. A lot of this is just your preference, skins, this stuff you can play with. You see where my settings are. Still figuring out sound issues. There might be some weird noises. Okay, your MIDI syncs. So whenever you got keyboards and other devices going on like that, they'll pop up like that basically. So if you've got an APC40 or a keyboard or anything, basically the easiest way is they kind of each have slightly different settings. If you have a keyboard, the QX49 is going to be your general setup. You can set up your input and your output, and you can see what I've got going on there. APC40 is a pretty common tool. If you have a different MIDI device, you probably have a lot of other ones. Just go look up on the website is the best idea to get exact MIDI routings for that. But that's how you're going to set all that up. Um, so once again, some of this stuff is not as important for you at the moment. The little custom things. And last bit here is go to our file type and bit depth. The file type has to do with what type of file you want to be rendered out when you complete a file. It's not that big of a deal. You can look up the difference between those two. I prefer AIFF. Bit depth, you want to set, so this is going to be the bit depth that Ableton is resampling all of your audio internally at, and the highest format is 32. You're going to want to set that at 32. Basically, you're going to resample at 32, be working in 24, and by the time everyone hears it, most likely it'll be in 16. So we try to work as high as we can, and as it gets processed and sent to mastering engineers, or if you do that yourself, then you will be able to slowly decrease the bit depth to make it more available to the public. that's really a whole nother lesson, and that wasn't very descriptive at all. So, anyway, some of this stuff you can figure out once again as you go. I prefer to not have long samples warped. In general, I try to like keep everything to not where Ableton will not automatically warp it as soon as it goes in because it tweaks the sound of even a drum sample, anything. It's very subtle, but it kind of destroys the the subtle attack and just the there's a word here, it destroys the sound. So what you're going to want to do is unwarp one shot, turn off default warp mode, repitch. And what this does is even on the little samples it's still going to warp them by default, but since it's on repitch, as long as your BPM is the same that you resampled it at, it'll actually keep the audio the same more or less, although I completely disagree. If you listen, this is just a, yeah, the best approach. I wish Ableton would figure out how to not warp anything unless you ask it to. That'd be great. Okay. Create fades on clip edges. This is something I turn on and off constantly while I'm working in projects. Like if you're moving around drum samples, you do not want this on. It's going to put a fade on the front of the clip, and since your drum samples are milliseconds long, it's going to take off that initial attack on a kick or whatever. But then when you're moving around giant 16 bar loops of synth pads or something, you probably want that on to make sure that you're not going to get any pops whenever you cut them, or really more in particular when I'm doing little cuts, I'm going through like a vocal loop and I'm cutting up little parts of it. I keep that on and it'll just immediately put fades on all the edges for you, and then you won't worry about getting pops in your recordings because those happen. I've got a lot of them. And default launch mode. These are all things that are more about performance. I'm not going to get into that right now. And I think that kind of does it. Yep. So that was basic preferences.